Hello and welcome to the Sports Desk. I'm Sarah Mulcairns. Coming up this week, the Yorkshire racism scandal and cricket's time of reckoning.
The chairman of Yorkshire County Cricket Club has just resigned following criticism of the way racism allegations have been handled.
What I've seen is a culture that's locked in the past, a culture that finds it difficult to accept challenge and change.
I thank Azim Rafiq for his bravery in speaking out. We're sorry for what you and your family experienced and the way in which we've handled this.
With Azim coming out, it's prompted me to come out because I held this for almost over 10 years now.
It should just be, you're good enough, boom, you're in. Not because you're brown, green, yellow, red. How does that matter? Give me the job, I'm good enough.
This has happened for a long time and nothing has been done about it. And now is the time that something needs to be done.
It has been front and back page news for nearly 2 weeks. The allegations of institutional racism by spin bowler Azim Rafiq and Yorkshire's handling of the investigation has plunged one of England's most historic sporting clubs into crisis. As a new chairman tries to pick up the pieces, we will hear from 2 more players who say they were racially abused at the club. We will get the views of Pakistan-born England cricketer Owais Shah before asking the game's governing body how it can regain the trust of Britain's South Asian communities. It is lovely to have you with us here on the Sports Desk podcast this week. In studio beside me, quite nice treat, is the BBC Sports editor, Dan Rowan, and also returning after sitting out last week. You're feeling much better, Nesta McGregor.
I'm confined to a small room in the house and drinking all manners of liquids, but I'm still here, Sarah, still with you.
Well, it is good to have you back on the podcast. And I mean, if we think about the last week, 2 weeks even, that we've gone through in sports and sports news, these big stories for how we live, in the societies, they just keep coming, and this story is no different, Dan.
Absolutely, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, it's dominated the news agenda like very few stories I can recall in recent times, quite frankly. I mean, I've spent a lot of time outside Headingley the last 2 weeks. I guess I'll be back there soon. And it'll continue into next week, this story, and beyond. I mean, it's gone well beyond cricket now. This has become a national scandal, quite frankly. And I think for me, 2 moments have really given it momentum. Firstly, the club, Yorkshire, deciding not to take action against anyone, despite Azim Rafiq having been found to have suffered racial harassment and bullying. And then the revelation last week that a racial slur by batsman Gary Ballance towards his then teammate was treated as just friendly banter. That, of course, sparked outrage, huge political pressure, an exodus of sponsors, the loss of England hosting rights as the ECB got involved, resignations, further allegations, recriminations, the involvement of former England captain and pundit Michael Vaughan, who, of course, admitted he was named in the report but denied Rafiq's allegation of a racist comment, added fuel to the fire. I've never seen anything quite like it in terms of an implosion. I mean, as you just said, this is Yorkshire, no less. Such a famous club brought to its knees. And it's forced, I think, not just them, but the ECB and the whole game to take a really long, hard look at itself and ask some tough questions about culture and diversity.
I'd second that, Sarah, and I'd say being housebound, you kind of obviously have more time to read, watch and listen to what's going on. And like Dan says, I remember this story, a few months ago, just being a brief mention in a newspaper, on the radio, and just seeing it grow into leading, like Dan says, most, if not every major news organisation. I'm talking all around the world as well. I hate to sound a little bit blasé, but being, playing sports all my life and being in dressing rooms, I can't say I was shocked by any of the language or any of the revelations, but naturally the handling and treatment of it is worrying. But what saddens me as well is that obviously Azim Rafiq clearly put up with it as long as he could, took as much as he could. And ultimately, I think people don't speak up because of the mental strain it's clearly taken on him. He probably knew that going against that would come with forfeiting his career, which clearly that's what's happened.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, to remember that there is a human being, at the heart of this story, a human being who was asked to be treated in a way that was fair. And he has spoken about where those experiences left him, close to taking his own life. And when you think about this story and all the elements to it, it's always really important to come back to that as well, to understand the personal toll it can take, and no doubt will have taken, with many other stories coming forward, and the potential for more whistleblowers to come. Also joining us this week is Ankur Desai from the BBC's Asian Network. And Ankur, you have been covering this story for some time.
Yeah, Sarah, this is a story which has been on my radar for the last couple of years, but I think it also goes beyond that, because I've covered stories around British Asian cricket for quite some time. I've made a documentary with Adil Rashid and Moeen Ali for the BBC, where we talk about the challenges of getting to the top as a British Asian cricketer. I played to a county standard myself. I grew up with Monty Panesar, and I saw firsthand actually the sort of structures that were in place, which sometimes would be difficult for somebody from my background to, I suppose, progress. I remember the very first county game we played, we were 3 out of the 11 players who were from a British Asian background. None of the coaches or the management had seen us play. Yet the very first game, they put us in the batting order at 9, 10 and 11. And for no apparent reason. And we were then subsequently playing over the course of the season. I sort of climbing the batting order, and I ended up topping the batting averages. But why I started so low down to start off with, it just brought back a lot of memories for me in terms of my childhood and my experiences playing within cricket structures in this country. And then fast forwarding all the way to Azeem, I've been speaking to him and building a rapport with him over the last few years. And he's had a very difficult time, as you all alluded to. And I think this could be a watershed moment for British Asian cricket.
And I think one of the most telling points from the last couple of weeks as well, Ankur, is the fact that more people are coming forward, and you have been speaking to them.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. Over the course of the last year, since I've been covering Azeem's story, a lot of people have approached me to talk about their personal experiences. I covered a story for us at the BBC Sport earlier this year, late last year, where there was a lot of talk about challenges that even grassroots cricketers are facing within Yorkshire grassroots leagues and community leagues, and about allegations of racism and how it was difficult for people to report these incidents. So I've been talking to people at different levels. I've also been approached recently by 2 people who were former academy players at Yorkshire County Cricket Club, and their allegations are historical, but no less disturbing. And we're going to hear from them now. I spoke to a gentleman who played at a level where he was touted as a prospect, someone who could potentially represent the county at a higher level as well when he was younger. And one of them is Irfan Amjad, who we're going to hear from. What you're going to hear, a lot of people may find upsetting and disturbing from this actual account.
He came marching into the room and he looked into my eyes, and he said that was a typical shot, wasn't it? And he just left. I was left stunned. I didn't know how to react. It was the first time I'd ever been racially insulted directly to my face. And I think obviously with Azeem showing the courage that he has, it sort of prompted people like myself to come out. And if I was to advise anybody else, if you did encounter such racism, you should come out and you should let everybody know what you experienced.
So that's Irfan Amjad, who spoke to me earlier this week, and he said, as you could hear, he gained, I suppose, confidence from hearing what Azeem's had to say, and he felt compelled to give his account. Another person who came forward and spoke to me this week is a gentleman called Tabassum Bhatti. Again, he played in the late 90s, so about 10 years before Irfan, and he again talked about a very disturbing experience that he had while he was an academy player at Yorkshire. And just to reiterate, you may find some of what you hear from Tabassum quite upsetting and disturbing.
Normal process was when we were travelling away for matches, we'd stay in the hotel. What we'd usually do is spend a bit of time in the hotel room. We'd then meet up as a team and go out for a team meal. So I was just in my own hotel room, minding my own business. I was on the phone to somebody leaning out of my bedroom window, and there were some players in the hotel bedroom above who decided they would urinate, and they urinated on my head as I was on the phone leaning out of the bedroom window. I actually dropped the phone out of my window. I dropped it down 2 or 3 stories, and the only way I knew who it was is because they came into the hotel room and were then rummaging around in the bushes on the ground floor trying to find the phone, So as you can imagine, I was angry, I was sad, but, I was a young kid, 14, 15, 16 years old. I didn't know what to say, I was only a small guy anyway. I was always a shy person. I never, I didn't have the courage, to be honest with you, to say anything to him or speak out. I did mention it to the coach at the time, and he said, look, don't worry about it, leave it with me, I'll deal with it. But obviously, he didn't deal with it. I'm not the only one. I don't want to make it a sob story about me and what I've experienced. Yes, I've experienced things, as has Azim, as have many other people. What I think we're trying to get across is this has happened for a long, long time and nothing has been done about it. And now is the time that something needs to be done.
Why do you think more British Asians haven't talked about it in the past?
In my case, I was 14, 15, 16 years old. For me to pluck up the courage, I didn't even tell my family. And it's only in the last couple of days that they've heard about what's happened. And they're heartbroken, to be honest. They're saying, why didn't you tell us? We could have done something about it. And obviously I've matured and I've grown and I've seen what others have experienced. And just as a human being, I felt I needed to say something.
Tabassum Bhatti there relaying his experiences of racism at Yorkshire County Cricket Club and calling for something to be done. Anchor, what have Yorkshire had to say about these two cases?
So, Sarah, they've given us a response. They said Yorkshire County Cricket Club should be a club for everyone in Yorkshire. We're aware that a number of allegations have been made from individuals about their experiences in the media. These need to be properly investigated. They're also promising to set up an independent whistleblowing hotline, which they describe as a safe space for people to come forward with disclosures.
It's really interesting when you hear the stories, the first-hand accounts of the experience. And I suppose, in a lot of these cases, when people are coming forward down the line, they talk about the fear of talking at the time. And a lot of it is the culture that can be created around it. And I suppose when we use this term whistleblower, which Lord Patel has, in the last week, and the importance of it, it's a very difficult thing to go through. And to put your own personal experiences forward, to deal with the emotions, to deal with, your family's reactions if they have not heard about it. And it's a very delicate balance, I think, firstly, for whistleblowers to come forward.
Yeah, Lord Patel, of course, Sarah, the new chairman of Yorkshire and the man whose job it is now to try and somehow regain trust. And you're right. I mean, if this is what makes Rafiq such an important figure in sport right now, because there is a snowball effect, isn't there? Once he speaks out, other people get confident enough to be able to do the same. And they are revealing things that have happened in some cases, long, long time ago. It would be shocking, I think, to hear such accounts as those in any sport. But I think because it's cricket, I just feel it has an added resonance maybe. We talk about the spirit of cricket, don't we? The fairness and the decency, the values are part of its very identity. And so when you're hearing that spirit has been betrayed, it's particularly worrying. And I think the fear is that it has exposed this, an ugly side to the game, not just at the elite end, but perhaps also at the grassroots. And it will be a painful process, but the hope is that through that can become a more tolerant sport.
Dan, I think it speaks everything about the power dynamic, is that, these people are victims. And often when we hear stories, we're like, why didn't people speak out sooner? But I think you heard in one of those interviews even when it was said, I don't want it to sound like a sob story. Like, people often feel, I'm going through racism and it's bad, but someone has it worse than me. And if I come forward, I don't want to just make it about me. But a phrase that particularly irked me, and I've said it myself, and the other day I kind of thought, what do I mean by when I say it? And people say that, it's not just cricket, it's not just sport, it's not just football, it's a societal issue. And I've often believed that. But then I thought, if there's a music story about racism, we say, it's bigger than music, it's a societal issue. If it's a sports story, we say the same thing. If it's politics, if it's education, blah, blah, blah. But yet these are the things that make up society. So I think we kind of have to dismiss that notion now that, it's just small pockets, because these small pockets are the sum of the entire problem. So, I think some of those accounts have really shocked me. But it says everything about the power. And I wonder, Anchor, if these so-called whistleblowers, don't come forward, because at the very top of some of these organisations are people that's probably not, they don't think is going to be empathetic. They don't think are going to be able to relate to their experiences, which is why it took the Azim Rafiq case so long to be where it is now?
So I've had a lot of off-the-record chats with a lot of people who've worked within English cricket, whether that's from a coaching perspective, whether that's from a former playing perspective. And off the back of Azim's initial allegations last year, I spoke to a number of the people off the record, but so few were willing to come on the record. And they wondered if they would be blocked from opportunities in the future. They wanted to protect themselves, and a lot of people have said that why has there been a lot of silence from the British Asian community and from the British Asian cricketing community in particular. And I think that's partly to do with it. And that's partly why a lot of people have still, I think, in the wake of what Azim's had to say, still have a fear factor in place. And you haven't really seen that snowball effect just yet. We're still waiting, I guess.
It was really interesting. I was listening to a call-in programme around it, and a mum called in and her young son played cricket, not within the county setup, but not at Yorkshire. And she didn't want to be named. She didn't want her son to be named. And she was talking about experiences that he had relayed to her. He was a current teenager. You know, he's a young player going through it now. And she said, you know, I've asked him, I said, you know, will I go and talk to somebody? And he was just desperately afraid that it would be put back on him and he would be different and he would be singled out. And I think that speaks to when we try to understand why there's a reluctance or why these, you know, allegations can take time to come out, is that there can be a desperate fear for repercussions. And I think that's the thing about whistleblowers, that when organisations are trying to be serious about it, they've got to recognise that fear that can be there for them.
I think yeah, it's not just sport, as Nesta has said. This is, we've seen this in other arenas in society. Anywhere there's a power dynamic, there's a vulnerability to this kind of thing. But I think there's two characteristics of the dressing room. I mean, again, Nesta mentioned it earlier. I think it is by its very nature, when you're talking about elite sport, it is going to be a relatively insular world where certain things that you wouldn't necessarily hear or do outside are commonplace or accepted. But also, you know, you're dealing with young people who have dreams, and they do not want to do anything that's going to affect their possibility of getting on. And they would worry that if they were to speak out, that maybe that could be used against them, or they might not get selected. And so you can see how these things how sport can be prone to this, sadly.
And Anchor, just on the one phrase that kind of set this alight in a way, this term banter and using that relating to a racial slur. And I think it's just really important, you know, if anybody doesn't kind of realise it at this stage, Anchor, that was the thing that seemed to be the thing that lit it off, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The fact that it was dismissed as banter or labelled as banter, whichever way you want to coin it, and how that was allowed to just sort of be accepted and that wasn't upheld. And an interesting talking point for myself and actually my listeners on the BBC Asia Network, I did a phone-in on this just last week on the use of the P word as banter, and how sometimes British Asians can sometimes also be guilty of using the word and it being used as banter. And a lot of British Asians say, but we're allowed to use it. We've tried to reclaim the P word. And for me, it's just like, it should not be acceptable anywhere, you know. And for so many years, for my parents' generation who arrived in the 70s, you know, that had some historical connotations, extremely negative ones, which sit very uneasy with a lot of people. And it just brought back memories of actually what people were going through last year when Black Lives Matter took place and people were trying to sort of talk about the use of the N-word. It's simply racism. It's not acceptable. It's unacceptable. It shouldn't be in society. It shouldn't be part of our dictionary or our lexicon.
Yeah, and we talk about a generational shift, and I think that's what we're seeing now, is that past generations, Anchor, would have been told, kind of get on with it, suck it up. As we've heard in football, when, you know, players were racially abused on the field, it was score a goal and shut them up. I think nowadays you've got a younger generation who are more vocal, who know that there are support systems in place to support them more. So although I don't think, like you said, we've seen the snowball effect that we were, I don't know, hoping to see, because as well as Yorkshire, I thought, you know, a plethora of clubs would also be accused. Not that, you know, it's necessarily happening everywhere, but I do think younger generation feel that they have a voice, and the reason I say that is, in a dressing room, I know that the first time you let something slip, it's almost like the horse has bolted. I've been in dressing room where things have been said and I've been very uncomfortable. And if 5 seconds go past, I think, should have said something. The more it's said, the more the fear is, I don't want to be the non-team player who's suddenly going to cause that eruption in the dressing room by having a problem with the banter that's going on. And I think after everything that's happened, players will suddenly now the first time they hear it, say, and that completely stops it as well.
Don't want to be labelled the troublemaker. I think that was something that was always conscious in my mind growing up, yeah.
It's worth noting, guys, that I think the Yorkshire story is only the latest in a list of others around race and inclusivity in cricket. You had Michael Carberry, the former England batsman, Sarah, last year saying that racism was rife in the sport. You had a survey conducted by the Players' Union around the turn of the year, which found that a quarter of all the respondents said that they'd experienced or witnessed racism in the game. There was an allegation by former umpires John Holder and Ismail Dawood over what they alleged was institutionalised racial discrimination at the ECB, which it denied. Earlier this year, you'll remember there was historical tweets of a racist nature by England bowler Ollie Robinson that came to light when he was making his Test debut. And now you've got Yorkshire as well. And so this has been building this, I think, for quite some time, and an acknowledgement slowly that cricket's got a problem and it needs to be addressed.
A couple more developments this week as well. The Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket, which was set up by the ECB in March, have issued a public call for people to share stories of discrimination at all levels of the game. The Commission's chair, Cindy Butts, described this as a time of reckoning for cricket. And we have also had the England Test captain Joe Root, who has been a Yorkshire player since 2009, issuing a statement in which he said the racism scandal had fractured our game and torn lives apart. Root then took questions on whether he could recall seeing or hearing any racism during his time at the club.
Not that I can recall, no. No, I can't. But the thing is, what I will say is that it's clear that things have happened at the club, and we have to make sure that we eradicate it, and we look to find ways of making sure that this never happens again in the sport.
England captain Joe Root there. And Azim Rafiq has responded directly to Root's press conference with the following tweet. Rafiq wrote, "Disappointed is not even the feeling, incredibly hurt, but uncomfortable truths are hard to accept, it seems." And Azim Rafiq will get his opportunity to tell his side of the story in full when he appears in front of MPs at a Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee hearing on Tuesday the 16th of November.
This is the Sports Desk.
Back then to Yorkshire and the racism scandal that has engulfed English cricket. Dan, who have you been talking to about this topic then?
Pakistani-born batsman Awais Shah, Sarah. He won 94 England caps, played for both Middlesex and Essex. He retired from first-class cricket in 2013. And I asked him for his reaction to the revelation that Rafiq was subjected to a racial slur by his Yorkshire teammate Gary Ballance, and that the report described it as banter.
This is a serious comment which has affected him, and I think something has to be done so that there isn't a repeat episode of this for another young Asian cricketer, whether it be in Yorkshire, Lancashire, Middlesex, Surrey, I don't really care. No person of not just Asian colour, but any black or any colour, any ethnicity, any different background should experience anything like that. And if they do, it needs to be dealt properly and stamped out of cricket. Look, I've got a son, I've got a daughter, and my son plays for Middlesex. I don't want him to go through that. That's it. That's my main thing, right, as a father. So let's make sure that the kids of tomorrow don't experience this, where a young kid, well, I say a young man was about to take his own life.
You'll be aware that several more players of South Asian descent have come forward with similar experiences, sadly, in recent days. You were born in Pakistan. You then went on to have a fantastic county career and won 90-odd caps for England. Did you ever experience racial abuse or discrimination when you were playing cricket in England?
Not to my face. Nobody ever called me, the P word or anything like that. Whether I've had enough opportunities, I never really looked at that as an issue. Yes, I experienced racism at school when I first came over to England. I remember playing browns against whites in football. That used to happen. But you couldn't really say anything then, because even if you complained to the teacher, nothing happened. So It was something.
Let me ask you about opportunities then, because as you said, Awais, there's obviously there's the area of abuse and language and how people are treated verbally. And then there's another area of this discussion, which is about opportunity. And this is something that I know you've spoken about in the past. But tell me, I think it was last year that Vikram Banerjee became the first ever British Asian head coach of a county at Surrey. Why do you think we see so few people of South Asian origin involved in coaching cricket in England, given the number of people from those communities who play the game?
Yeah, it's a strange one, but I also want to ask you to change that question. Why not people of colour? Forget South Asian, forget that. I don't want to be one carrying the flag for South Asia.
Yeah.
No, people of colour also need opportunity. And even in the system, whether it be at Middlesex, Surrey or whatever, Yorkshire or whatever cricket club you want to take, I would like to know how many players of colour get an opportunity to be involved in the coaching, because it should just be, you're good enough, boom, you're in. Not because you're brown, green, yellow, red. How does that matter? I'm good enough for the job. Give me the job. I'm good enough.
Former England cricketer Owais Shah there talking about the low number of coaches from ethnic minorities in English cricket, amongst other issues. So I think it's a good time to bring in our next guest now, because Vikram Banerjee heads up the ECB's South Asian Action Plan. Welcome to the podcast, Vikram. Lovely to have you with us. Let's talk then about this action plan. It was launched, wasn't it, back in 2018. So what was the overall goal and why was it felt it was needed?
Thank you. Yes, it was launched a couple of years ago, and the broad rationale for it was that we knew that there was a huge amount of passion for the game amongst South Asian diaspora in this country. They wanted to play, they wanted to watch, they wanted to take part. But cricket wasn't doing enough for those, providing enough opportunities for those things. And we needed to do better, we needed to do more. And as part of that, we created this action plan that covers the whole game, from playing through to coaching, as we heard Owais talk about, through to attendance and that experience.
How do you think the last couple of weeks in particular will have affected your work?
Look, I think obviously the last couple of weeks have highlighted some really uncomfortable truths about where cricket is today and the length of the work and the journey that we have to go on. The last couple of weeks have pinpointed things that are just not acceptable and should not be any part of our game. It is worth highlighting that actually, if you go, and the people I'm speaking to up and down the country, there are some really good people in cricket and all sports doing some really good work in this space. And that shouldn't be forgotten. But discrimination of any kind is not acceptable, should never be tolerated, will not be tolerated. And so while the next couple of weeks, months will be uncomfortable, one way I'm looking at it is that there is a real opportunity now. The silver lining is there's an opportunity for us as a sport to use the power that sport has to really accelerate this and learn from it and build into a sport that does bring people together, that really removes and highlights the challenges that we have and then removes any discrimination if we go about this in the right way and learn the lessons that we should be learning about where the sport is today.
Vikram, why is it that despite introducing the Rooney Rule to guarantee that at least one black, Asian or minority ethnic candidate is interviewed during the recruitment stage for all coaching positions, Vikram Solanki remains the only non-white head coach of a county side, do you think?
Yeah, I think Owais spoke very passionately about the stats that they are at the moment are uncomfortable, and we need to improve on those statistics. I think with anything that we do in this space, we made a commitment in 2018 that this was going to be a long-term commitment. That commitment hasn't changed, but anything like this will take time. Systematic change takes time. I think we have to be wary of knee-jerk reactions in this space. So what we have done is put in place some initiatives like the Rooney Rule, like bursaries. We now are seeing nearly a quarter of our specialists on the courses, the specialist courses, those that become professional level coaches, and nearly a quarter are from non-white backgrounds. We need to keep pushing forward. Now is the time to double down on that focus and that time. So hopefully those numbers will go up very, very soon.
Just quickly, because it's not just coaching, is it? There's an underrepresentation, isn't there, when it comes to playing, right, professionally? Is this because of discrimination?
So in terms of your first part, how much is that? At the moment, about a third of our recreational playing base, so clubs and teams around the country, come from a South Asian background, so Indian, Pakistani, Bangladesh, and so on. Those numbers do decrease and to quite an uncomfortable level when you get to the professional end. The reasons for that are broad, and the recent months have shown that there is an aspect where some of the players, young boys and girls that have come through the pathway, may have experienced things that are unacceptable. But there are steps that we are now taking on the things, on a number of different areas, whether that's bursaries, whether that's mentoring, whether that's support and education for these players, and education, importantly, for the staff members, the academy directors or the coaches or the people that work in cricket, that will start to build and improve, hopefully, on those numbers.
Vikram, Nesta, you've mentioned the work that you do in trying to get players, coaches, and people in the stands. I just want to know, do you do anything around dressing room culture, or is it not your role then to teach humans how to treat other humans, so to speak?
No, absolutely. We have worked with both the PCA, so the body that looks after the playing staff in this country, and with the counties themselves on education. And that education can be with staff members, coaches, but also we work with PCA on an education programme for the players themselves on things that around cultural stuff, around these areas of discrimination and what is acceptable and what is not. There's a long way to go on that. Clearly, there's more work to be done, but we have started that programme.
Vikram, good to speak to you again. And I know Vikram, having covered the South Asian strategy plan for the Asian Network in my role there, and I know that there has been a lot of decent groundwork made, and over the course of time, I suppose the ambition is for greater diversity. But Vikram, does there need to be greater diversity at the highest level of English cricket? So when Lord Patel left his role last year, there's no representation of anybody from a BAME background at that level. And unless that change happens and there is greater representation at the highest level within the corridors of English cricket, will we continue to see people from diverse communities be lacking in terms of representation, whether it's from coaching, grassroots, playing, all sorts of levels, because then there won't be that representation that people from British Asian communities can identify with?
My personal view is that representation is hugely important. People need to be able to see people like me in those leadership roles, and also governance and representation helps decision making. It's been shown multiple times. One thing I will say, Anchor, is that we do fit the Sport England code at the ECB. We have met the kind of non-white, ethnic diverse numbers there. But again, if you look up and down the counties, there are those that are on that front line. We need to push those CPA codes, those governance codes that we're working on to get to that point up and down the country. And I think that is one of the many things that will unlock some of that decision making and that representation across the sport. Yeah, so it's a hugely important piece.
Just quickly, Vikram, do you accept that the ECB has been guilty of some complacency over this issue of diversity and representation? And do they have to share some of the blame for what's going on now?
I think that on the point of if this is where you're going to, in terms of the claims made that whether we should stepped in earlier into the process, I think that's difficult because the regulatory and it's just good governance that we had to let that play out, and as soon as we could, we did step in, and I feel we made some good, strong action there. I think our responsibility now moving forward is to ensure that what is in effect one person's experiences are now not delivered across the country, and not experienced by others. The kind of the millions of people that we have playing, the 3 million fans that we have, none of them, or any that wants to come into the game, should ever have to experience the game. And that is our responsibility, along with the counties, to ensure that is driven through in the coming months and years.
Vikram, thank you very much for your time on the Sports Desk podcast. Appreciate that. Vikram Banerjee there, who heads up the ECB's South Asian Action Plan. Interesting, guys, to hear him talk about it being an opportunity. And I suppose it can be, but that does depend on how much counties and clubs are receptive to actually looking within themselves and looking at what they need to do and implementing action plans. Is there a sense, Anchor, that some good could potentially come from this?
Yeah, I think so. It really does make a difference if you do have that representation at county level within structures. One of the key aspects of the South Asian strategy was to embed people from the British Asian community within county structures to help talent ID and help, I suppose, bridge that gap from, let's say, grassroots cricket up to, let's say, county level cricket up to
because
the higher
that is
levels.
quite significant. I mean, if we've not made it clear now, the amount of players playing at grassroots young levels from South Asian communities is massive.
It's huge.
But it does not filter up.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what needs to change. And those processes and those routes need to be a lot smoother, and they need to be a lot, in the eyes of many British Asians, a lot fairer as well. So if we see that change happen at the grassroots level, then that could precipitate upwards. But that is a question which remains to be seen, because this plan was put in place back in 2018. Caveat, yes, there was a pandemic, but I think change needs to happen extremely quickly now because of what we've seen with the allegations that continue to filter through.
Yeah, huge amount at stake, not just for Yorkshire, but for the game as a whole, for the ECB. I interviewed the outgoing chairman at Yorkshire, Roger Hutton, last week, and he was very critical of the ECB's role in this. He said they could have done more quicker. It's going to get more painful, this story. There's going to be more revelations next week in Parliament when MPs will hear Rafiq, and they'll interview former executives from Yorkshire like Hutton. And who knows whether other players from other counties will come and speak in the future weeks and months. They've been inspired by this, perhaps, maybe from black cricketers who, as I said earlier, have raised issues in the past. So I think cricket's got a really tough time ahead of it, but I think in the long run it has to happen, and some good can come.
Yeah, and if nothing else, this puts the fear factor onto anyone who's been displaying this behaviour as well. The fact that it's in the public eye, there's so much attention to it. Like, not only would victims maybe feel empowered to come forward, but anyone who's been part of this behaviour will suddenly be in fear that, they don't want their names being dragged across the tabloids and the news. So, yeah, if any good, perhaps that also.
And just a quick one from me, trust is a key word in all of this.
I was just going to say that, Anchor.
Yeah.
In this, what we have seen and heard is a significant lack of trust from, lots of people at different levels of the game that have not been able to feel comfortable to come forward with their stories. And if cricket is to learn, it has got to show that its trust can be earned back. And it does that in various ways, doesn't it? It does it in a dressing room. Owen Morgan speaking this week, didn't he? About the fact that, they have conversations about these issues, that they talk respectfully about all their different lived experiences from loads of different communities, that happens in dressing rooms up and down the country, that, players are heard, that they're listened to, that player talent ID, that gets better, that coaching gets better, that representation gets better. But that takes hard work and trust, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, look, Owen Morgan spoke so beautifully after England won the World Cup in 2019. He talked about how they've embraced Adil Rashid and Moeen Ali's faith of Islam, and they respectfully move away when the champagne is sprayed. They spoke to me in my documentary about this, but they also said that when Adil Rashid will talk about his faith, the other players are curious and inquisitive and will ask interesting questions. Now, if the highest level of the game, the most important dressing room in English cricket can uphold those values, surely that should be filtering down through the other levels, at grassroots levels. When a British Asian family comes to a match and they bring their British Asian snacks and food, and they might bring a prayer mat and go and peacefully pray, that should be respected, and that shouldn't even be an issue. And if that can filter down through, and that trust and that understanding is embraced, then we'll start to hopefully see some sort of change. But it's going to take a long time to build that trust and build that understanding and empathy.
Absolutely. And I'm sure with the whistleblower hotline as well, there may well be more painful stories to come.